Welcome back. Today we're talking about vocation, but maybe not in the way you usually hear it.
Right. It's often framed very narrowly, isn't it? Like priests, nuns, people in full-time ministry.
Exactly. But the sources we're looking at today push back on that. They argue vocation is much bigger, something everyone has, whether they're religious or not.
Absolutely. And this narrow view can actually weaken what the sources call the vocational domain. Imagine like mission as a football team. You've got the center forward, that's the explicit church stuff.
Okay.
Then you need support, the wingers.
Yeah.
One winger is the foundational stuff, the basics. The other is this vocational domain, how we live out our calling in the world.
And that's the winger that's often underdeveloped, right?
Yeah.
Even though it has huge potential.
Precisely. It's potentially transformative, but often overlooked.
So that's our mission for this deep dive, to really unpack this vocational domain. We want to see why it matters for, personal growth, for community, maybe even for understanding the divine.
Yeah, it might offer a totally new angle on purpose and meaning in your life.
Let's start with that idea of it being beyond the church walls.
Okay. The sources really stress this vocation as a distinctive call from God, but one that applies to everyone, not just church members.
That's a big shift. It means purpose isn't just found inside religious institutions.
Exactly. It broadens the playing field considerably.
And that naturally makes you rethink discipleship, doesn't it? If vocation is broader, maybe discipleship is too.
It does. We often tie discipleship so closely to church involvement committees, services, programs.
Running the church activities, basically.
Right. But one source brings in Karl Rahner's concept of venturesome love.
Venturesome love. What does that entail?
It's less about church administration and more about taking risks for others, stepping out, acting for someone else's good, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable.
So discipleship as active, outward-focused love, potentially risky love, that's quite different.
It is. It challenges that internal focus. Maybe we've missed something crucial about connecting faith to real-world action for others. Think about your own week. Where might that venturesome love show up?
But that's a good question for listeners to ponder. But this idea of acting morally, taking risks, it bumps up against the modern world, doesn't it?
Definitely. The sources talk about how, in our sort of postmodern context, those shared moral guideposts have eroded.
Yeah, the consensus is gone.
Right. So we're left with moral autonomy. Each person carries the weight of figuring out right and wrong for themselves. Bauman called it moral agony.
Moral agony. That sounds intense, that feeling of being alone with these big choices.
Exactly. And the church, which used to provide a lot of that moral structure, faces a new challenge. How do you help people find their own values in such a fragmented world?
It's a huge task, because maybe in the past you expressed your values through public service or your job.
But even that's not straightforward now, is it? Bauman points out bureaucracy, focusing on just the immediate results. It can get in the way of that deeper moral expression.
So how do we build that inner moral compass, then, if the old ways are less clear?
Well, the sources bring up this idea of sort of hero's journey within.
Okay.
Building a moral identity is hard work. And Becker warns against just getting lost in your own head, endless navel-gazing.
Right. Just thinking about it isn't enough.
The key seems to be engagement, action, getting involved. And the vocational domain offers a natural place for that. Ollie Harry talks about moral selving.
Moral selving, like crafting yourself.
Yeah, crafting a virtuous self, but not in isolation. It happens through encounters, through grappling with moral ideas in the real world.
Okay, so it's learning by doing, essentially, through interacting with others.
Which leads perfectly into Levinas and his idea about encountering the face of the other.
Ah, yes, I've heard of this. It's fundamental, right?
He argues it's this basic human capacity. It exists before we're taught any moral rules or social customs. Just truly seeing another person.
Seeing them without the labels, the masks.
Exactly. And in that raw encounter, free of convention, something happens. It's not a moral checklist, but it's profoundly revealing.
Revealing about them or about us.
Both, really. Our sources suggest it allows us to see each other fundamentally, and through that, we discover more about ourselves, too. Our identity gets shaped in relationship.
So relationship is key, not just abstract ideas.
And Palmer builds right on that, connecting it to the nature of truth itself.
How so? With Jesus saying, I am the truth.
Precisely. Palmer points out Jesus didn't just list truths, he embodied truth. Understanding truth meant entering into a relationship with him.
So truth isn't just objective facts out there, it's relational.
Yes. It resonates strongly with Levinas. The emphasis shifts from just being open to ideas to being open to people, to encounters.
That's a big shift in thinking about truth.
Palmer describes truth, or knowing, as this vulnerable, faithful, and risk-filled interpenetration of the knower in the known. It's not detached observation.
Wow. So engaging in that vocational domain, building those open relationships, is actually a path towards truth.
That seems to be the argument. It's about understanding through connection.
But wait, isn't there a risk there? If truth is just relational, couldn't it become purely subjective, just whatever I feel is true?
That's a really important caution.
Okay.
And the sources address it directly. Palmer warns against relying solely on our private perceptions.
Okay.
He says, truth is between us, in relationship, to be found in dialogue.
Dialogue, so it requires talking, listening.
And a specific kind of listening. Listening without trying to control or dominate the conversation. Being accountable to the other person, genuinely open to being changed by what they say.
That's hard work, resisting the urge to just impose our view.
It really is. But it pushes us beyond our own bubble, forces us to encounter difference.
Which connects to James Allison's idea, right? About limitless connections.
Yes, limitless fraternal relations. His point is, if we share a common source, a heavenly Father, then our sense of kinship shouldn't stop at our family or people who think just like us.
He called sticking only to the familiar. What was it?
Idolatrous belonging. Treating our little group, our familiar way of thinking, as the ultimate measure of value. He argues that's a fundamental error.
Wow. Idolatrous belonging. That's strong. Okay, so if we pull these threads together, what are the key tasks then for churches, for communities?
Our sources seem to boil it down to three urgent things.
First?
Actively foster that moral self-development, that moral selving.
Okay.
Second, really encourage those broader connections, pushing beyond the idolatrous belonging. And third, intentionally create opportunities for these transformative encounters with the other, and potentially with Jesus through them.
And how do they suggest doing that?
Surprisingly simply. Support real opportunities for meaningful encounters, especially in community ministry settings.
Community ministry, like volunteering, outreach.
Exactly. And there's a fascinating point about volunteers here. Often they lack formal power in those situations.
Right. They're not the boss or the official expert.
And that lack of power, according to Buber's ideas, can actually enable more genuine I-thou relationships, not just transactional ones.
Because the power dynamic is lessened.
Yes. It can create space for grace, for real listening and learning from people whose lives might be very different.
It makes sense. Being alongside someone facing hardship, it is humbling. It can be overwhelming.
But that vulnerability, that willingness to be potentially overwhelmed, creates what the sources call a thin place.
A thin place where new understanding can break through.
Exactly. Whether it's suddenly seeing the limitations of your own perspective when interacting with someone with dementia, or feeling that shared human fragility with an asylum seeker, these moments spark internal conversations.
And that leads to humility, right? Seeing your own limits.
Yes, a deeper self-awareness and humility.
So this venturesome love in action, it sets off a kind of positive chain reaction.
That's the idea. They call it a cascade of grace. It includes practicing vulnerability, like we said, but also gaining insights from unlikely people.
Building bridges between different groups, what the sociologists call bridging social capital.
Right, and challenging your own comfort zone. They even use the term class treason, stepping outside your expected group loyalties.
Class treason, interesting. And ultimately fostering authenticity.
Yes, becoming more genuinely yourself through these interactions.
But there's a flip side, isn't there? A danger in this kind of helping relationship.
Oh, definitely. The sources are very clear on the risks. Sennett warns that pity can curdle into contempt, that helping, even with good intentions, can sometimes strip dignity from someone who's already vulnerable.
How do we avoid that?
Sennett suggests reserve, a kind of respectful distance that acknowledges the power imbalance. He gives the person receiving help space to think about the helper's motives without feeling crushed by obligation.
Reserve. Not aloofness, but respect for their autonomy.
Exactly. And Mary Douglas points out that even freely given help creates an obligation. It can lead to submission, not real connection. Reciprocity matters.
Right. The burden of gratitude can be heavy.
And Hannah Arendt adds another layer, questioning why we help. Are we genuinely focused on the other person, or are we just using them as an occasion for our own moral development?
Oof. That's a challenging question. Are they a person or a project?
It's a critical distinction. These are serious ethical tightropes to walk.
So, given these dangers, these power dynamics, How do we build real solidarity across inequality? What's the foundation?
The sources suggest something perhaps unexpected, recognizing our shared human imperfection, our shared need for grace.
The democratic fact of sinfulness, as they put it, meaning we all fall short.
Precisely. Engaging in community ministry, seeing suffering, but also seeing our own capacity for error, our own neediness. It can foster a profound awareness of our dependence on grace.
It levels the playing field in a way.
It does. And that shared vulnerability, that recognition, actually prepares the ground for the message of forgiveness to be heard and received authentically.
That's really interesting. It connects the practical action back to a core spiritual reality.
And it's fascinating how this whole theme of personal growth and transformation resonates with wider cultural trends today.
You mean beyond the church?
Yeah. We live in what Postel calls an intangible economy. Experiences are valued, especially, as Pine and Gilmore point out, transformational experiences.
People want things that change them, not just entertain them.
Exactly. Businesses even talk about aspirants, people actively seeking experiences that will help them evolve, become someone new.
And there's a sweet spot for that kind of transformation.
Pine and Gilmore identify it. Experiences that shift your worldview, change how you see your place in the world, enhance your capabilities, and crucially, inspire wonder.
And the argument is that this vocational domain, this journey of moral selving through encounter, it hits that sweet spot.
It seems tailor-made for it. It speaks directly to that deep human yearning for meaning and genuine change.
But surely not all transformation is good transformation.
Absolutely not. And the sources warn strongly against cheap transformation. Things like substance abuse might offer a temporary escape or feeling of change, but they don't lead to real growth.
So there's a need for positive alternatives.
Yes. The church, or any community focused on growth, needs to proactively offer meaningful pathways. They call them pre-formative activities, things that strengthen that natural desire for moral growth before people seek out harmful substitutes.
What would those look like?
The forces give examples, things like organized pilgrimages, community projects focused on justice or service, initiatives that offer a taste of a different, more meaningful, story-rich life, things that spark that desire for positive change.
Like planting a seed for transformation.
Exactly. And maybe tapping into that desire for story and meaning that you see even in popular culture, like with certain bands or movements.
But a single event, however powerful, isn't enough for lasting change, is it?
No, definitely not. Character isn't built in a weekend. Sustaining transformation requires ongoing practice, ongoing opportunities for moral action.
So follow-through is key.
Crucial. The sources point to models like the Salvation Army or the Catholic worker movement that build this long-term engagement into their structure. And they suggest smaller groups, like home groups, could learn a lot from self-help movements about supporting people in that ongoing journey.
Integrating the experience into everyday life.
Yes.
Making it stick.
Okay, one last piece then. What about actual religious experience in all this? Does it fit in?
It does, and in a really interesting way. The sources see the vocational domain as demonstrating this persistent human capacity to sense God, even if it's not always explicit.
How does that connection happen?
They describe it as a powerfully oblique route.
Oblique, meaning indirect.
Yeah, it might not be a direct mystical vision. It might be triggered indirectly, maybe by being deeply moved, even overwhelmed, by empathy in an encounter with someone else's reality.
So that vulnerability, that openness in the encounter,
can itself become an opening for religious experience. It can lead to a newfound confidence in God's presence, a deeper sense of belonging, and strengthen that commitment to moral action. So risking being overwhelmed through empathy, that's the oblique route.
That's the idea. By encouraging us to step out, connect, be vulnerable, the vocational domain actually creates the conditions where religious experience can happen more readily.
And that fulfills that modern desire for transformation we talked about, but on a potentially much deeper level.
Precisely. It connects the dots between service, personal growth, and encountering the divine.
Okay, so let's try and sum this up. We started with vocation being broader than just church roles.
Right, a universal calling. Then we explored discipleship as venturesome love, taking risks for others.
And the challenge of moral selving in today's world, finding our values through action and encounter.
Especially encountering the face of the other, which Levinas saw as fundamental and Palmer linked to a relational understanding of truth.
We touched on the dangers like idolatrous belonging and the ethics of helping.
And the importance of shared vulnerability, that the democratic fact of sin as a basis for solidarity.
And finally, how this all connects to the modern search for transformation, and even opens a path, an oblique route, to religious experience.
It paints a picture of the vocational domain as this incredibly rich space for growth, connection, and meaning-making.
It really does. It suggests that engaging here isn't just about duty or charity, it's a pathway to understanding ourselves, understanding truth, and connecting with something much bigger.
A journey of transformation, really.
So the final thought for you listening is perhaps this. Where in your own life are you being called to engage with the other? Beyond your job description, beyond your usual circles.
What might happen if you stepped into that space with openness, with that venturesome love?
What transformative possibilities might be waiting there for you and for your community? Maybe take a moment this week to reflect on your own vocation in this wider, deeper sense.